the Republicans.
Jeffries and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer are withholding their party's support for DHS funding after its agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens. GOP Representative Tony Gonzalez told CBS News the Hispanic vote is at stake for the Republican Party.
If we want to keep that long term, we do have to make a shift, not necessarily in policy, but in communication.
This week, the House and Senate will hold oversight hearings on the 2 DHS killings in Minnesota. Luke Garrett, NPR News, Washington.
This is the second week in the search for the mother of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie. Officials believe Nancy Guthrie was abducted from her home in Tucson, Arizona. There are multiple reports of ransom notes being sent to local media. One Tucson TV station says it got a note demanding $6 million by tonight. The Guthrie family released another video over the weekend saying they will pay. But NPR's Bill Chappell reports authorities don't have strong leads in the case.
Pima County Sheriff's Department put out an update essentially saying they're still working to find Nancy Guthrie, and investigators have repeatedly been seen working in and around the house this past weekend even. But the Sheriff's Department also said they haven't identified any suspects or people of interest or vehicles that might be connected to the case.
NPR's Bill Chappell reporting. The Seattle Seahawks have won the Super Bowl the second time they've taken the title. They defeated the New England Patriots last night 29-13. The game was dominated by Seattle's defense. New England didn't score until the fourth quarter. For millions of viewers, the big draw was not the game. It was the halftime show and its global star from Puerto Rico, Bad Bunny. NPR's Isabela Gomez Sarmiento reports from San Juan, where she watched with fans.
Sisters Mirelis and Arelis Piñeiros Rojas lined up for a special viewing party of Bad Bunny's halftime show hours before the game started. They say they don't keep up with the sport. We don't know anything about the Super Bowl, Mirelis says. The Super Bowl belongs to Benito. They came for the 15 minutes of his performance, and they say their excitement can't be contained. It's so much, Arely says, the feeling doesn't fit inside her chest of watching him for 15 minutes represent an entire island. Isabela Gomez Sarmiento, NPR News, San Juan.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
And good morning. I'm Michelle Coram. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Duval School Superintendent Chris Bernier says the district is aware that local parents have been arrested by ICE while their children were in school, leaving them without someone to care for them. Bernier acknowledged that during a school board meeting last week as Duval parent Chris Kiernan told the board she's concerned about an increase in immigration and customs enforcement officers near schools. Kiernan says she is part of a network of volunteers who help students get to school when their parents are afraid to take them. She told Jacksonville Today that she and other volunteers have seen ICE agents along with Florida Highway Patrol troopers near schools. You can read more on this story in today's Jacksonville Today. That's at jaxtoday.org. The number of measles cases reported in Duval County is up to 5 now, and more cases are popping up all over the state. University of Florida in Gainesville says it's investigating potential exposures on campus after 2 cases were reported in Alachua County. Collier County in southwest Florida has seen the largest number of reported cases in the state so far, 20 cases, mostly involving students at Ave Maria University. Near 69 degrees this afternoon here in northeast Florida, overnight low around 44 degrees, and then for Tuesday, becoming sunny near 77.
Support for NPR comes from the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, it's long been said that all politics is local, but a flood of national policies are having impacts on the First Coast, from ICE to DOGE to the future of elections. We get expert analysis on how it's impacting local policy, finances, and governance with attorney and author Chris Hand. Later in the program, we talk to the Jacksonville Symphony CEO about managing the historic nonprofit at a time of waning public financing and cultural capital. But first, we're joined as we are each month by attorney, author, and local government expert Chris Hand. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Ann. Were you pleased by the result of the Super Bowl last night?
I was bored by the result of the Super Bowl last night. I think I'm in good company. How about you?
Likewise.
Yeah. I mean, the Seahawks, I thought, did a fine job of sort of eking out this very slow-moving game. But, you know, it was a moment for them, certainly.
It convinced me that the best team in the NFL was neither the Seahawks nor the Patriots, but the one that lives right here, the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Well,
I'm just sorry we didn't get to see them in the Super Bowl this year, but hopefully in 2027.
Missed opportunity for sure. There's a lot of local issues that I want to talk about with you, Chris, particularly a school budget deficit that we're seeing in St. Johns County and the inclusion of Jacksonville on the Civil Rights Trail, the National Civil Rights Trail, which is some good news. But I want to start with a question about elections, because that's something that a lot of people have been focused on here and nationally. Two really significant developments that we saw just in the last week: a federal raid of a Georgia voting facility and the president's call to federalize elections. So if you can just sort of help us remember what the law is when it comes to kind of how elections are run, and maybe about the significance of this Atlanta voting facility raid.
And we're in some unprecedented territory, and that's because the U.S. Constitution is very clear about who administers elections in this country. Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, is known as the Elections Clause, makes it clear that the administration of elections is up to the states, that the state legislatures have the power to regulate elections. Now, that section does allow a role for Congress, but what is not mentioned anywhere in Article 1, Section 4 is the President of the United States. The executive branch does not have a role in that process. So over the last, course of the last year, President Trump has had a lot of messaging about elections and potentially a federal role in that. And we've seen just in the last couple of weeks that manifest itself through legal action. There has been some ongoing efforts by the federal government to obtain ballots cast in the state of Georgia in 2020. As you may recall, that was a very close election in 2020. Joe Biden won the state of Georgia by 11,000 votes. Very controversial because President Trump at the time contacted the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and others in an attempt to, potentially change that result. Became the result of there were multiple investigations, no findings of fraud or any election wrongdoing in the state of Georgia. But the federal government attempted to get ballots from Fulton County, which is the Atlanta area, one of the biggest counties in the state, ballots that were cast in 2020. There was a civil lawsuit the federal government initiated several months ago. Fulton County had declined to turn over those ballots, citing its responsibilities to keep ballots from past elections safe and secure, and to maintain the chain of evidence related to those. Apparently, at the end of January, the federal government was able to apply for what's called a seizure warrant and receive that, and they served that seizure warrant on January the 28th and took about 24 pallets, 700 boxes of ballots that were cast during the 2020 election. Over the weekend, a federal district court judge in the state of Georgia ordered the federal government to produce the kind of affidavit that it sort of issued to get that seizure warrant. In other words, they have to publicly make clear now what the justification was for seizing those ballots. They have to do that by 5 p.m. tomorrow, based on this weekend's court ruling. That will tell us several things. Number one, why the federal government felt like it was entitled to these ballots and what probable cause of a crime. Remember, this is a seizure of ballots pursuant to a criminal investigation. So they have to demonstrate some probable cause for that. This affidavit will, theoretically show the basis for their application for the warrant. We do know a few things. Already public is the search warrant itself, and the search warrant lists a couple of potential federal crimes. One is federal election fraud. One is failure to kind of preserve ballots for, 22 months, which is the required period under federal law. Now, Fulton County, as you can imagine, is very strongly opposing all of this. That was kind of what led to the weekend's federal judge's ruling. They are claiming that both of the statutes the federal government is citing are invalid. One, because the federal election fraud statute has a 5-year statute of limitations, so they couldn't prosecute anything based on anything that happened during the 2020 election, which was now almost 6 years ago. And that, again, the other statute relates to the obligation to keep ballots for up to 22 months. It's obviously been far beyond 22 months since November 2020 at this point. So we're going to learn a lot more tomorrow, but it is an unusual kind of, kind of insertion of federal authority, particularly federal executive authority, into an election issue. I think made even more unusual by the fact that the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was present during the execution of the search warrant. And then following that execution, she set up a telephone call between the FBI agents involved and President Trump. So
Why is that? Why is that so unusual? I mean, remind us a little bit about what the role of the Director of National Intelligence is and does, and then kind of what, if any, significance that phone call has in terms of her involvement.
So the job of the Director of National Intelligence is to coordinate the kind of executive branch's foreign intelligence gathering resources to kind of help make sure those are aligned for the administration. So again, somewhat not sort of the common practice to see a DNI involved in kind of an election issue. I think that's why the release of this affidavit tomorrow, Ann, is going to be very important.
Would it have to show, I mean, for her involvement, would it have to show some sort of international, voter fraud conspiracy or some sort of international component?
Well, that'll be interesting to see whether it does, right? Sometimes, to the extent there are foreign intelligence issues, those are protected from public disclosure because of the sensitive nature of those. But again, given her kind of active role in the involvement, one might think that that would be one of the grounds that the affidavit cited to obtain this seizure warrant and be able to go take these ballots. So we'll find out a lot more about that tomorrow. Tomorrow's release may answer some of these questions about why she was involved. It is unusual for a president of the United States to be talking directly to FBI agents who are doing an investigation. Traditionally, those functions, those kind of law enforcement and investigatory functions of the federal government have been separate. And as we said from the start, the Constitution does not provide a role for the president in election administration. States are given that power. Congress has some power to kind of set rules related to federal elections. But again, that requires an act of Congress, not something the president's directly involved in.
And so the president recently had a conversation with Dan Bongino, the former deputy director of the FBI, who's now returned to his podcasting role. Let's take a listen to what he had to say, and then I want to ask you about it.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win.
So we know, of course, I mean, his claims of voter fraud and winning states that he says he won, not winning states. I mean, that has been thoroughly debunked. But in terms of Republicans taking control of elections, that's even different than just the discussion of nationalizing. To say that a partisan takeover would be appropriate, is there any precedent for that kind of statement or even that inclination by a chief executive or even the one party or the other?
Well, I don't know. It's certainly not to that sort of public level where a president of the United States has talked about his party taking over kind of the election process or the federal government nationalizing it in general. Again, this is very contrary to not only the plain language of the U.S. Constitution, but also what the framers of the Constitution told us their concerns with. For anyone who's had been able to spend some time with the Federalist Papers, you know that is something that Alexander Hamilton and others spoke about, was concerns about an overly large role for not just generally for kind of a central federal government, but also specifically in kind of elections as well. So no, that is not the model that has applied in the United States. And again, that sort of model of giving states the power to govern elections has been consistent throughout our history over time. The president, certainly is able to voice his opinion, but this would require an act of Congress to have, kind of any more national role. And it's pretty clear that that is unlikely to happen. In fact, right after the president kind of launched his call for this and was on this interview you discuss, someone asked, Tom Tillis, who's a Republican senator from North Carolina, what he thought about this idea, and he basically completely dismissed it, saying we simply would never have the votes to do that, even if we thought it was a good idea, which I think members of Congress, probably of both parties, don't think this is a good idea. The precedent setting of having a national election and having the levers of election administration switch between one party or the other, depending on kind of who is in the White House, is probably not a prospect that members of Congress of either party are too eager to embrace, particularly given how consistent our election administration has been over the years, and generally how well it's worked.
What does all this tell us about the 2026 elections, or the 2028 elections for that matter? I mean, we know that there's this raid that happened. Is that something that we might see in other places? And just generally speaking, I mean, there's also been some conversation by one of the president's former advisors, Steve Bannon, suggesting that ICE surround polling facilities during the 2026 elections. So there's a lot of conversations that would appear to have some impact on the midterms. What are your thoughts or concerns when it comes to, how those elections might roll out?
Well, again, I think we're going to have to watch and see. I think the transparency involved in this Atlanta situation, where the federal government has to release its grounds, is providing a certain level of accountability. And I think the court systems are going to be very involved, particularly if there are other efforts like this over time between now and the 2026 elections. Look, in a lot of cases, and what we've seen, particularly in recent years, are where there are efforts, whether they're intended or just sort of perceived, to make it harder for people to vote, that sometimes has the opposite effect. It sort of encourages people to come out and exercise their vote. I think there would be very limited support in Congress, particularly given the events of the last month, for having any role for ICE in the elections. ICE doesn't have any jurisdiction over elections in any way, shape, or form. So I think there would be immediate court challenges to that. I think there would be minimal appetite in Congress for that as well, just given some of the implications. So I think a lot of that right now is talk, but of course, I think people will remain vigilant and watch that over time to make sure that if there is any action backing up that talk, that is immediately adjudicated. Because again, the Constitution is very clear, federal law is very clear, and there is no role for anyone other than the state legislatures at local election administrators like our supervisor of elections here and Congress in a limited way to impact the administration of elections.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Chris Hand about recent headlines, both at the national and state level, and you're welcome to join our conversation. You can give us a call on air at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org and find all the ways that you can connect with us. We have an email from Michael. He says, should the public be concerned about the security of the Georgia voting records, given Trump's own history with files?
Well, one of the reasons that Fulton County is kind of pushing back so hard against the sort of seizure of ballots, and why they initially declined to provide them with this federal civil lawsuit that was filed a while ago, is for exactly that reason, sort of ballot security, that they are charged with maintaining the safety and security of these ballots. It's crucial that these, given the way we vote in this country, that the security of those is paramount, and they're just not kind of walking around on the street. So that is a concern. The security of those ballots. Now, the 2020 election is that's been over and done with. Like, the president who was elected in that year has already completed his term in office. But I think many people are concerned about potential precedent setting, which again, what we're going to find out tomorrow is going to be important to understand why the federal government felt like it had to, seize these ballots.
And you suggested that the term that they're required to hang on to these ballots has expired. Do we have a sense as to why they still have them? I mean, why they weren't destroyed? Is there just a sense that historically they are relevant still?
Sometimes it can be just for historical preservation. I think other times, to the extent that there are any legal actions related to those ballots. Remember, there were a lot of lawsuits filed in the state of Georgia, and of course, there was also criminal actions. There was criminal indictments filed against President Trump and a variety of other alleged co-conspirators in kind of the Georgia election case. Now, those charges have since been dismissed, but it may well be that a combination of those factors, pending legal action and kind of for the historical record, might be why those ballots were held.
I guess there might also be concerns about optics, about destroying ballots in an election that has continued to be something that the president insists that he won. I want to move on to talk about this issue of kind of national influence, because we also are seeing it with the Florida DOGE report that came out. That obviously is a creation spawned from the federal DOGE, and it has been something that has created some concerns for, not just local level officials who are being asked to account for their spending in ways that perhaps they are not accustomed to at the state level, but also maybe without the same level of accountability in terms of the auditing process that they might be used to when it comes to being, when questions are raised about their spending. What is your sense as to how things like the state level DOGE, or just the sort of search for waste, fraud, and abuse, is impacting Jacksonville officials or the way that Jacksonville is running?
Well, and we were just talking about kind of the interplay between the federal government and the state government over elections. Now we are seeing that interplay between the state government and local governments over local government spending. Look, cities and counties are what are called instrumentalities of the state. I mean, the state, in the same way that the federal government is supreme in the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, state governments are kind of supreme under our state constitution. But we do have in the Florida Constitution the right of home rule for counties, particularly charter counties like our consolidated city county is, and for cities as well. So we're not used to seeing kind of the state lean in the way that this DOGE effort has. I mentioned that interplay because we saw it at work last week. Something that Jacksonville Today reported about was when the Duval DOGE committee met. What they met to do was kind of take a look at the recommendations Florida DOGE had made related to the city of Jacksonville. And those recommendations suggested city of Jacksonville had up to $200 million of wasteful spending, which would be about 10% of the city's $2 billion general fund budget. Here in the city of Jacksonville, we have a city council auditor's office, which is extremely well respected, has existed for decades to kind of monitor and hold accountable the city for spending. The council auditor, of course, did its own review of this $200 million and could only account for less than half of that, $90 million. They could sort of undersee what they were talking about from a spending standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean they agreed with it, but they could see only about 90 of the $200 million. And so the Duval DOGE committee talked about that last week. And again, there are both Republican and Democratic members of that committee who expressed puzzlement about where that $200 million number the state effort came up with. And so they are taking the council auditor's analysis, sending that back to the state and asking for more clarification and more detail on where they think this $200 million in wasteful spending is. Now, we're seeing this exercise repeat itself, Ann, across the state. City of Jacksonville is not the only entity dealing with this. State DOGE or Florida DOGE has released these kinds of reports with a variety of different jurisdictions. There's a lot of speculation as to why. One potential timing reason might be, of course, there has been a push by the governor and even some members of the legislature to put a proposition on the 2026 ballot reducing property taxes. Certainly helps to make the case for that if there, is evidence of wasteful spending at the local level out there right now. But right now there seems to be some confusion here at the city of Jacksonville about what the Florida DOGE effort has actually identified in wasteful spending. So we're going to see some additional back and forth between the city and the state of Florida over those numbers.
We should say the council auditor should be recognized for its role in helping to avert some significant waste, fraud, and abuse in the JEA scandal, which was something that unit drilled down on and managed to discover these really questionable rewards for people and at the high executive level.
It's really one of the best innovations in our consolidated government. Like I said, they've existed for decades. Every council auditor started off as a junior staffer and sort of worked their way up through the office. They have a lot of institutional knowledge. I like to say to people that the council auditor, for those from the 1980s who remember that commercial, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. The council auditors really are the E.F. Hutton of city government. They've got credibility, experience, well respected, and so when they talk, council tends to listen.
Well, and council relies on the council auditor's office to help them break down all kinds of issues with the budget. They turn to the council auditor to get answers when they want to find out more information about spending or waste. And I'm curious a little bit about the council's reaction here, because not only do they have a council auditor that they lean on to thread through every budget to help them determine how they want money spent or not spent. But they also are all pretty involved, all 19 members during the budget process, down to every line item, poking at all kinds of spending, or adding spending that they're concerned about. This is not a mystery, this city's budget. It is a pretty open document, and certainly all 19 city council members are very involved each year when the budget process, is happening. So do you have any sense as to just politically how they receive information from a state audit that is not 100% clear on kind of $100 million of misspent money, even at this point, when they're being questioned about their decisions and being labeled, as having engaged in waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, they were very diplomatic about it, but I think they very clearly said no sale in the sense that they are sending back to the state a series of questions and asking for details that weren't in the state report. You're absolutely right, Ann. And as I can say from personal experience, having kind of, served at City Hall kind of during 4 different sort of budget years, council takes that role very seriously. The charter gives the council the ultimate role to pass a final budget. They take that role, as I said, very seriously, even down to the penny, particularly in very difficult budget times. And we're in a little bit more difficult budget times than the city's been kind of over the last decade. And all of these council members, with maybe a couple of exceptions, voted for all of these budgets that are now the subject of this state spending. So I think they have other interests as well in kind of defending their work product. Again, they were very diplomatic about it, but they made it clear that they did not. They had a lot of questions about kind of the $200 million number that the state used, that they wanted to get more clarity and more detail because the state did not. Anyone who's read the Florida DOGE report, it doesn't go into that sort of level of granular detail. So council made it clear it wants to get more information about, what that $200 million is. They also expressed openness that, look, if there is wasteful spending, we obviously want to eliminate that, but they want to understand clearly what the state is recommending. Right now, the council auditor, has not been able to make the math work in terms of what the state's recommending and what they can reconcile.
Well, the definition of wasteful in this case, it seems a lot of it seems to stem from a definition of DEI, spending on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or practices. And we know from reporting in the local media that a lot of the money that they've flagged, state DOGE, is money that was going to police and fire pensions through a management group that had a DEI statement on their website. But locally, we know, too, that Cathedral Arts Project was flagged for a justice-involved youth program of about $500,000 that was labeled DEI. Hope at Hand, which is a therapeutic art and poetry program, was dinged for the same reason. And, we're just about to talk to Steven Libman from the Symphony. The Symphony also got a note in this report for about $500,000. In part because they mentioned DEI on their website. And so this broad brush of waste, fraud, and abuse is, in some cases, not necessarily about spending, but the language that some of these agencies use to promote inclusivity.
Right. And I should note that very quickly after this report came out and there were any questions about it, I believe both Cathedral Arts Project and the Jacksonville Symphony sent statements to Duval DOGE making clear that they had not spent any money that the city had provided on sort of any DEI type program. So you're right. Why this is important to have groups like the council auditor and the council itself go through this, because, it is possible that there are kind of lots of statements made in this report. Look, the state government is not here every day. They don't necessarily know the particulars of how these programs run or the specifics of how they spend money. And in the 2 or 3 days they spent here during their DOGE audit, you're likely to kind of pick up on a lot of those nuances. So that's why this clarification is very important. Those 2 organizations immediately clarified, but while I think the Duval DOGE committee is also attempting to clarify where do these spending recommendations come from, because it may well be that they're not wasteful spending at all. They're just the result of misinterpretation of how the city is actually spending money or how outside groups are spending money.
We're talking to Chris Hand about state, local, and national political headlines. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. That's how you can reach us on air, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find the other ways that you can connect with us. This civil rights trail, the U.S. Civil Rights Trail, this is something that you've actually been involved in on the local level. And I want you to kind of remind us the history here. But we learned that the city of Jacksonville has now been named part of this U.S. Civil Rights Trail, which has existed since 2018. And, back when it was created, there was concern that we were not a part of that, given the enormous civil rights history that's happened here on the First Coast, not just Jacksonville, but St. Augustine.
Well, as you say, Ann, the Northeast Florida, Jacksonville and St. Augustine and other places have an incredibly rich civil rights history. I think really a key portion kind of our community's identity in many ways. Back in 2018, when Anna Brochet was the council president, she appointed a task force on civil rights history. I had the honor to be a member of that task force on civil rights history. And that task force ended up kind of coming up with 3 recommendations. Number one, to have the city of Jacksonville apply for inclusion on the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. Number 2, to establish La Villa as a kind of civil rights history district. As you know, La Villa, we talked about that rich history the community has. That's particularly concentrated in the La Villa part of downtown. So to establish that as a civil rights history district. Then number 3, to maintain sort of an ongoing timeline of Jacksonville's civil rights history in kind of digital format here at the city of Jacksonville. Well, the first of those recommendations, the city has continued to pursue that. And, this week, just last week, Mayor Deegan and the city announced that Jacksonville will be included on the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. That'll be sort of at 40. There'll be 40 markers of historic places here in the community. It'll start at a historic church where Martin Luther King Jr. gave one of his famous speeches in 1961, but it'll expand to 39 additional sites. So it's really a big deal to kind of recognize the pivotal role that Jacksonville played kind of in the civil rights movement and civil rights history in general.
And we know that one of the first marker is going to be placed now February 25th at Mount Ararat Baptist Church on Myrtle Avenue North. Folks watching our live stream will see an image of the church. This is where MLK delivered a pretty well-known sermon in March 1961 called "This is a Great Time to Be Alive." There are other sites around town that are also well-known. It does appear that the city's willingness and determination to create its own civil rights trail is essentially what got it inclusion on the national civil rights trail, that it required that local commitment for the national trail to kind of say, well, this is going to be part of our own designation.
Correct, Ann. And there's been this is one of those areas where there's been a lot of consensus in city government. Obviously, the mayor's office has made this a significant priority. Members of council have as well. Visit Jacksonville, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that not only is this important to recognize for historical purposes, but this has kind of tourism and impact on visitors as well. So Visit Jacksonville, under the leadership of CEO Michael Corrigan, has been sort of very involved in this effort as well over time. So again, something that city government has worked on from a variety of different perspectives, but is a significant recognition. Jacksonville Today has reported on it multiple times over the last week, but a big deal for the city of Jacksonville.
The decision by the city to pursue this, does it also, there's still a lot of very painful memories associated with this, and I would guess that there's still some community resistance by some who prefer not to acknowledge some of the more painful chapters. One of the sites that's included on the trail is James Weldon Johnson Park, formerly Hemming Plaza, which has its own name roots in historical slavery, but that was also the site of Axe Handle Saturday, which was a very violent attack on Black protesters and demonstrators who were seeking to integrate facilities in downtown Jacksonville. And those pieces of history have not always been embraced by the folks who want to promote Jacksonville as a bold new city of the South or whatever more recent moniker it has in terms of trying to shed that Old South more virulently and openly discriminatory history.
Well, and beyond the kind of old adage that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it, I think kind of it's important that a community acknowledge all of those events, sort of good and bad, that have happened, because those events have all gone in to shaping a community and helping to make it what it is at any given time. So I think it's very important for the community to acknowledge all these different pieces of civil rights history, in the sense that to the extent that there have been accomplishments in civil rights that have occurred, that is something that, Jacksonville should celebrate that occurred here, and those moments where we sort of moved forward as a community. And in those times like Axe Handle Saturday, as you said, that were horrific violations of civil rights, important that the community acknowledge those as well so that we don't repeat them. And so that those lessons continue to exist and they are present in a tangible form for future generations to learn from. It's when you don't put up markers like that that people develop amnesia. They forget that those things happened. It's crucial that future generations be able to learn from those past events. And that's why one of the reasons these markers and that historical recognition is important.
I want to ask you on another subject. I want to get to school budgets in St. Johns County. This is one of the best funded school districts. They've actually a couple times passed their own taxes within the county to fund their school system. They, however, are struggling with a significant deficit. Their new superintendent, Dr. Brennan Asplin, saying it could be as high as $15 million for the 26-27 school year. And he's pointing the finger in large part at these vouchers that are the family empowerment scholarships, essentially, that are funneling money from the public school system directly to parents who want to take their kids out of that traditional public school system.
Well, and as you say, St. Johns County, one of the best and best funded school districts in the state. The community is highly supportive there. I don't remember a revenue proposition on the ballot that hasn't passed with at least 2/3 of the vote in recent years. So St. Johns County community really embraces their top-ranked public schools. But like every other school district in the state of Florida, they are now struggling in the face of a variety of pressures. One of those pressures that Superintendent Asplin has noted is the state's new voucher program, which was started in 2023, has taken about $4 billion away from traditional public schools here in the state of Florida, and we're seeing those impacts all over. There's been a lot of talk about debt and deficits here in the Duval County schools. St. Johns County, another kind of nearby example where this is happening. But there's no school district in Florida. None of the 67 districts in Florida are not facing these challenges right now. And that program, that voucher program, is coming under a lot of scrutiny at the state level right now. In fact, there's legislation moving through through both houses of the legislature, particularly the Senate, that would tighten the oversight of that program. You may recall, and we've talked about it on this program before, but back in November, there was a really scathing Auditor General report on the program, which essentially said that, at any given time, and State Senator Don Gates from the Panhandle has also been a leader in talking about this, but what he has said following that audit is that at any given time, the state does not seem to know where about $270 million is being spent. There was not good oversight, not checking, people who were receiving these scholarship monies, whether they were actually in public school, which of course would make them ineligible for the scholarship monies. There was reporting, out of Pensacola out of the Pensacola News Journal that back in December that in Escambia County, there were 3,200 students receiving scholarships, and about almost 10% of those were actually in public schools. So there's been a lot of criticism about the administration of this program, the oversight, whether or not they're actually checking student status. So there are some bills led by Senator Gates going through the legislature this year. His projection that he said in various news reports is that he thinks public schools have probably been in total shortchanged by about $100 million because of the lack of oversight at this point. So this is a concern by school districts around the state, but it's also now a concern by members of the legislature who are pushing some legislation through to revamp the oversight of this program.
Well, that is an issue that we are going to be watching closely. There is a board meeting for the St. Johns County School Board February 10th. That starts at 4:30 if you're interested in following that issue. But Chris, I know we'll follow up on it in months to come. And it's great to talk to you today. Thanks for being on again.
See you in March, Ann. Thanks
All right.
again.
Thanks, Chris. Up next, from ballets to regional theaters, the Jacksonville Symphony is a veteran of the arts and is moving his organization forward despite the odds. We're talking to its CEO. Welcome back. Leading an arts organization is a balancing act, especially when it's a nonprofit. And it's a job that is becoming more strenuous as public funding and cultural resources face curtailment. Today, we're talking to Steven Libman. He's the president and CEO of the Jacksonville Symphony, about how he's adapting to this new reality and his plans for the road ahead. Steven, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Very
glad to have you. And I will sort of dial back to the previous conversation we were having with Chris Hand, because while we were talking, we got a message from Jane on Facebook, specifically asking about the Jacksonville Symphony and its mention or its singling out by the state DOGE. Jane wondering, why was the Jacksonville Symphony attacked about the budget? Is it because of blatant DEI prejudice?
I can't answer why, and we try not to get involved in the game of politics. So what I can say is that the Jacksonville Symphony continues to do amazing work for this community. Factually, what we heard about from that report was incorrect. So all of the grant for example, the grant that we receive from the Cultural Council always goes to pay musician salaries, and that's what it goes for year after year. So we try to just keep doing what we're going to do and stay true to our mission, and just like I said, avoid getting caught up in the game of politics.
That's getting harder.
It is, but I think if you you can break through the noise by staying true to what you do. Sometimes people are provoking you to elicit a response that we're just not going to give, because again, we serve our 100,000 patrons who come to the hall every year and our 60,000 students, and we know that what we're doing is the right thing to do. We're an amazing organization for the state of Florida and for this region, and we're very, very proud of what we do.
Some concessions sometimes have to be made. We know that after this initial focus, that the symphony did go and take some DEI statements down off its website. And I'm sure that was a considered decision that probably had a lot of conversations leading up to it. So what are some of those discussions like when you're having those, or when you're discussing these issues with your own members of the symphony?
Sure. So we put things on our website. Some things, for example, if we're promoting a show, a concert, it comes up and then it comes down. Other items like our strategic plan go up on the website when the plan is complete. So what you're referring to is something that had been put up 5 years ago. And so whenever someone referred to it, it's like, well, that was placed there 5 years ago, and it's time to refresh the strategic plan, which we do every 5 years. And so that's really why any change was made. We still stay true to our mission. We want everyone, regardless of their ethnic background, to attend the symphony. We also have programs that serve individuals who are hearing impaired, who are blind. We have programs for veterans. And so if that's serving the community and with casting a very wide net, that's what we're going to keep doing.
How do you manage your staff? I mean, it must be a little bit dispiriting for an agency that focuses, or a body that focuses so much on community involvement, education, outreach, all of these things that the symphony does. How do you communicate, for instance, with your musicians about not letting that noise interfere with the music that they're making?
That's a really good question. I think that at the extreme end, you could see what's happening, say, in Washington D.C. and at the Kennedy Center, which is a different kind of challenge. We don't face that same challenge, and our musicians, everybody, we read the newspaper, we listen to WJCT, so we are aware of what's happening. But again, we stay true to our mission, and that's never going to change. We have our values, and as I mentioned before, if we were to say, well, we're never going to serve disabled veterans, then that would be bowing to a pressure that we're just not going to do. Or if we said we're not going to serve historically disenfranchised members of any community, I think our community, our patrons, and our employees would be very upset. So we, again, continue to move forward with serving everyone in the community, and that has proven to be very successful for us, because we receive corporate support and foundation support and support from individuals. And I think if we were to do the opposite, it would hurt us.
You've been in this a long time, this business.
Yes.
You've run, multiple ballets, theaters, regional theaters. And so you're very familiar with the art nonprofit model in the arts community. So is this cyclical, this kind of thing? Are we in a very unusual period in terms of your experience?
It's sort of yes to both. Yes, it's cyclical, and yes, we're in an unusual period. I think what's common and what needs to be common for all arts organizations, and we're going through a strategic planning process now, as I mentioned, is you have to remain relevant to your community. You have to make sure that what you're doing is relevant to your community, and you're demonstrating you want to have an impact here. We have an impact here in Northeast Florida. We're not trying to pretend we're in Houston or Los Angeles or New York and do something that's relevant there. I think arts organizations make a mistake when they forget that. And so if we maintain relevancy, that's very important to us. I have been doing this for over 40 years and running arts organizations for a long time. I can remember when I was in Pittsburgh, there was a movement to eliminate the National Endowment for the Arts. And the arts community galvanized around that. The newspaper, actually, there were newspapers, the newspaper donated a full page of space to take out an ad to support the National Endowment for the Arts. And so the arts community rallied together. That happened, and fortunately now we see the National Endowment for the Arts, in spite of everything you're reading about, continues to have bipartisan support in Congress. So you always have to tell your story. You always have to make sure that you are speaking to Democrats and Republicans and independents and not pick sides. And I think if you can tell the story and be transparent, always be transparent. So, maybe somebody didn't like the fact that we put part of our strategic plan 5 years ago on the website. We put our annual audit on the website, annual report, etc. So it's important that you are transparent. We are in far more challenging times now than I think we've been in a very long time. So that's true.
So what do you need from the community at a time like this?
I think what we need is to recognize for all of the arts that we are absolutely essential. So on a basic economic level, the arts are major drivers of the economy, both here in Florida and nationally. The arts contribute more to the gross domestic product than the travel industry, than the construction industry. It is amazing how much we contribute. So we talk about that to local business leaders. It's also important to realize how essential we are for driving new businesses to move here. And it's not only the Jacksonville Symphony, it's the Cumberland Museum and Cathedral Arts. Together we create an ecosystem that makes this place a rather wonderful place to live.
Well, there is a gala event on February 28th that the Symphony is doing. If you're interested, Steven Libman, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Happy.
We'll be back in just a moment.
The Florida Theater presents the Three Italian Tenors. This trio from Rome will be singing Italian opera arias and songs in their inaugural United States tour, Wednesday, February 25th at 8 p.m. Tickets and information at floridatheater.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com. Live Nation presents the Tedeschi Trucks Band. The blues and rock group will bring their Future Soul 2026 tour to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on October 9th and 10th. Tickets and information available at theamp.com.
Every morning, you turn to familiar voices, voices that help make sense of the day ahead. From NPR and WJCT News 89.9. Thanks for making us Jacksonville's most trusted morning companion.
The brain is the organ that makes us who we are. It's our conduit between reality and thought, but somehow we've only scratched the surface in understanding how the brain actually works.
Are there things that we might not be able to think? Possible true scientific theories we might not be able to understand ever?
It's part one of our special exploration, Brain Waves. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9. Federal agents have seized boxes of 2020 election ballots in Fulton County, Georgia. Days later, President Trump said elections should be nationalized.
Horrible corruption on elections, and the federal government should not allow that. The federal government should get involved.
Ahead of competitive midterms and with a shortage of election officials, the latest on voting security and integrity. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. A local Valentine's concert is an unlikely marriage of two passionate art forms, opera and classical sitar. Here to tell us about the sound of love is soprano and opera singer Mariette Aida Ansueto. Thanks for being here, Mariette.
Thank you for having us. I'm so excited to be here.
We are also joined by Arvid Smith, longtime local musician and sitar master. Good morning, Arvid.
Good morning.
So, Mariette, you are a classically trained opera singer. This event that we're talking about has been described as a mini opera, something that is bringing opera out of concert halls and into a somewhat more accessible space.
Yes.
Can you tell us about, first of all, how you guys came up with this idea? It is, as we said, sort of an unlikely pairing.
It is. So I'm classically trained for over 20 years, private study. And then from there, I just felt this calling in 2020 to start moving it towards sound therapy. I found that just how opera is so emotional, it evokes so much emotion within the listener that it can be geared into the wellness route. So with meditation and helping the nervous system relax, it's just been an incredible way to take it from the stage over to yoga studios and very relaxing spaces. And so Arvid has actually played in a few yoga studios, and I went to one of his performances and I just fell in love with just how almost haunting the sitar sounds. And it just popped into my head. And I went up to Arvid. I was like, listen, I do opera, you do sitar. Let's do a jam session. Let's see what it sounds like. And it was just incredible. I, as an artist, felt like it was a conversation that we were having and it was alive, that's what I really loved about it.
Arvid, playing the sitar is an extraordinary challenge, and being exceptionally good at it is very, very few people are. And you're sort of one of those very few people. So it is not surprising that she would reach out to you to be part of this. But what did you think when you were thinking about trying to play alongside opera music?
I was intrigued by the idea because opera in itself is intrinsically very complex. And, so is the music, from India, but it's a different kind of complexity. It's not as harmonically complex. And so that was my first big thought, is that how am I going to match all these wonderful melodies and wonderful colors with what I do? And so it was, I found a place for it, and it seemed gratifying. And there's a lot that the listener makes up, and the listener can hear in between what she does and what I do. There's this nether space that the listener is going to put the complexities and a lot of color on their end. They say that if you have two people singing two different notes, the listener is going to put a third note in there subliminally. And in a way, that's how this works, but there's a lot of color in what we do.
So I do want to take a listen to some of your performance together, and then I want to ask you a little bit about how structured it is and how much of it is sort of free-flowing. But let's take a listen. So tell us a little bit about what's happening there. Is there kind of an improvisational element to this? How do you come up with what you're performing?
We base each piece on a preconceived scale, the raga scales. Each one has a different color. Raga means color. and a different flavor and a different tempi, et cetera, et cetera. And she came to that with, based on, I guess, the scale that I'm playing, she will base a vocalese on that. And it's not an Indian music vocalese, it's a Western vocalese. And we play off one another and sometimes go to different places, but it is to a preconceived pitch, preconceived scales and everything. But there's a heavy improvisational element to it, in which she is amazing. This performance is at what was formerly known as the Karpeles Manuscript Library Museum. It is now known as the Karpeles Grand, and it is a stunning venue with beautiful acoustics. But I think it's interesting, this event, as we said, it's a kind of a celebration of Valentine's Day, and it offers an option for guests with a lay-down option. You can have a standard ticket, but you can also have a lay-down option. Explain to us why. What's the goal there, and what are you doing when you're having the lay-down option?
Yeah, so we decided to create it as a hybrid experience. Like I explained before, the sound bath portion, naturally in the wellness community, you lay down on a mat. You bring a bolster, pillow, blanket. It's kind of this immersion that you get to cocoon yourself in the music. And then with traditional opera, you have a seated concert ticket. And so I kind of wanted to just bring both worlds together, allow anyone who really isn't into a sound bath to have a seat to enjoy the music, and then also allow people who want to just immerse themselves to have that cocoon space.
It is a fascinating proposition, and I know it'll be a success. The show is called The Sound of Love. It is Thursday, February 12th from 7 to 8:15. As we said, it's at the Karpeles Grand. Mariette, Aida Onsueto, and Arvid Smith, thanks so much for being here and telling us about it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Join us tomorrow when we talk to the president of the National Civil Rights Museum, Dr. Russ Wigington, about the power of museums to preserve and share the stories that define us. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Live Nation presents the Tedeschi Trucks Band. The blues and rock group will bring their Future Soul 2026 tour to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on October 9th and 10th. Tickets and information available at theamp.com.